Now, don't get scared, y'all. Somebody throw somebody and say, that sounds a little new agey. I'm not talking about capital G. I'm talking about little g. Whether you know this or not, every one of you have an inner God this morning. And I don't mean like you are God. I don't mean a real God. I mean kind of a Men in Black God. Anybody seen the movie Men in Black where one of the aliens has that little alien in his head and he's controlling, his face comes off in one part of the movie and he looks like a man, but there's really a little alien guy up there in his head? Every one of us sitting here today have a little alien guy in our head. A little God inside of us that wants to raise up and move from little g to big G and be the God in our lives that controls things, that runs things. And what Paul is saying is you can't let that little alien God guy in your life get control. You can't let him take control of your brain because he will lead you in wrong directions every single time. There's a verse in the Psalms that says there's a way that seems right to a person, but the ends of it is death. There are things that, have you ever had anything that seemed like a really, really good idea when you first started doing it? Last night for me, it was when I got on the floor and get low. So it was not a good idea. Or maybe you start a night off and it seems like a really good idea to start drinking Jaeger bombs, and by the next morning you're like, that was not a good idea. You know what I'm talking about? There's things that we do sometimes that seem really right, and then when we get through with them, they were really wrong. That's because we're letting that little alien guy in our head be God. We're letting him or her run the show. And what Paul is saying here is we cannot do that. We've got to learn to tear that alien guy down and give God control of our brains. We have to become the masters of our mind. And for some reason, I missed my verse. There it is. He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. That phrase literally means you have to take down with violence the little God guy in your head that sets himself up as the God, the controller of your life. When we start to think thoughts that we want to kind of go in our direction and do it without God, rather than go in God's direction and let him lead the way and call the shots, what happens is we begin to go down the wrong trail, and the further we go down that trail, the harder it is to tear those thoughts down. And what God is saying is you got to take that little alien out of your head. You got to tear him off the throne and put God there. Let God be the one that controls your thoughts in your head and lead your path, because the little alien guy will lead you the wrong way every time. He even uses a word here in this verse where he says we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. The word he uses is computations, calculations. We all make thousands of computations, calculations in our brain every single day. Basically, your brain is this complex, wonderful organism we're going to talk about over the next few weeks that can do all this amazing stuff, but it comes down to a series of ones and zeros in computer language. It comes down to a series of decisions, yes, no, or maybe. Yes, no, or wait. Our brain works like that, and you and I, we're making decisions right now. Some of y'all are making a decision to listen. Some of you guys are making a decision to think about, I wonder how that new quarterback's going to do in the Packer game today. Some of you guys are making decisions about, I wonder if that roast is ready in the crock pot right now. We're making little decisions even when we're not really recognizing we are. All day, every day, we decide yes, no, or maybe. Yes, no, or wait. All the time in our brain, and God is saying we've got to let God get in control of all those little decisions, those computations in our mind. I say something that I didn't realize till a couple of years ago that I say, because I'm from the South. You guys, usually we were talking about the other night, Aiden and I were saying, you guys have words you say here that you don't know you say either. It's kind of part of your culture. You'll say things to me like, are you going to come to our house or no? And I'm like, what does that mean? It's kind of a negative question. Are you going to come to our house? In Arkansas, they would think you're saying, please don't. Or no. But we have things like that we do too that y'all don't. And one of ours is we say might, could. And I never knew that that was incorrect. I never even recognized I said that until Bill McCaskill, the pastor over at New Life, our parent church, one day was talking in church. And he said, Jim says might, could a lot. And I do. And he said, if you come to Jim and you say, Jim, could you come over and help me clean out my sewer? Jim will say, I might could. And I do say that. And y'all say that that's like, what is that, a double negative? I don't know English teachers, whatever that is. But I say might could. And as Bill was talking to the church, he said, I have figured out when Jim says he might could do something, what he really means is he's not going to do it. and I make these computations in my mind where I say, yes, I will, or maybe in Arkansas, I might could, or really what that means is no, I won't. I make these little decisions. I'm not going to do that. And what God is saying here is these decisions don't need to be in the control of the little alien God that's in your head saying, do that, don't do that. One more Jaeger bomb. Get on the dance floor, Jim. You're going to jam. But we have this little alien guy, and God said, don't pay attention to him because he can mess you up. You and I have got to become the masters of our own minds, and that means letting God in the mix, letting God in the picture. Here's how Paul says it at the end of this verse. He says, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And the word he uses there is a word that means to subjugate or to bring it under the control of Christ. Paul said the key to getting the battle of your mind under control, to winning that war that's going on in your head, in your heart, in your mind, in your emotions, he says, is to take every computation, every thought, everything you think, and let it come under the control of Christ. Make it God's slave. Say, I'm not going to make my own decisions. I'm not going to do my own thing, whatever I feel or whatever my gut says. I'm going to ask God, I'm going to filter it through him and see what he thinks is best. There's a thing I've talked to you guys about before, maybe on Tuesday night. If you checked out some of the 2.0 stuff. Until just a few years ago, scientists thought that in adulthood, our brains basically, for the most part, stopped growing. I don't know if you know this, but billions of neurons are in your head, and many, many, many millions of those are formed in your development years in childhood. Your brain is just growing inside like crazy, and it makes us able to move from saying mama and dada to, if you're smart, doing computations in algebra that I never could do. You know, I mean, you just grow and you grow and you grow, and all these neurons and synapses and all these things are firing and growing in your brain. Well, used to, scientists thought when you became an adult, that quit happening. The brain just kind of functioned and it didn't grow anymore. Well, in recent years, because of breakthroughs in medical science, they've been able to discover that's not at all true. There's a thing called neuroplasticity that goes on in the human brain. And although your brain doesn't grow as fast when you're an adult, it takes us a little longer the older we get to make some of these computations. Your brain's always growing. And in fact, your brain as an adult can either always be growing or it can always be dying based on what you think about. Neuroplasticity says this: when you think certain thoughts, neural pathways are literally formed, strengthened, and grow in your mind. The stuff, negative or positive, that you think about all the time literally physically grows and improves and develops neural pathways in your mind. The things you concentrate the most on, those become strong. And like John Ortberg says, the things you refuse to think about, that you just kind of put out of your mind and you stop fretting over, worrying about, thinking about, like kind of unused bus routes, they close down and shrivel up and go away. Your brain literally withers away these neural pathways when you don't use them anymore. You don't realize this today, but you have massive control over the way you respond to the weather changes in the environment around you. The way your life is going around you. You can't do anything about the problems and the pressures and the relationships and all that. But the way you respond, the way you think about them or don't think about them, can absolutely change the climate of your life today. There is a thing in neuroplasticity, kind of the subcategory of it, called synaptic pruning. And synaptic pruning basically means you can start thinking thoughts that will grow certain areas of your brain, or you can refuse to think certain thoughts and it'll kill off those areas of your brain. This morning, if you're going through a lot of pressure in your life, a lot of problems, and all you can do is think about, how is this going to work out? Oh no, I'm doomed. What are we going to do? I have a feeling that there is a Green Bay Packer quarterback sitting in a locker room about right now thinking a lot of those thoughts. What in the world am I going to do? And he's very worried. And there's another Green Bay quarterback sitting in that same locker room thinking, oh no, what is this new guy going to do? we think about these things, but on a serious level, today, if you're thinking over all these thoughts in your brain, they're driving you crazy, and you're worried about this one thing, or this one pressure, or this one problem, or this one relationship, or whatever it is, it's driving you crazy, and all you can do is think about it. Maybe this morning you need to do a little neural pruning. Maybe you need to cut some stuff off that you've been thinking about and say, you know what? I'm going to replace that. I'm not going to dwell on that anymore because it's not doing me any good to worry about it. And maybe today you need to develop some new neural pathways in your brain and say, instead of worrying, I'm going to start letting God be the little voice in my head, and I'm going to start talking to God. I don't know if you know this morning, but most of us in this room pray on a regular basis. You might say, no, I'm not a big prayer. I don't get up in the morning and do that. I'm not busy. If you're talking to God, you're praying. If you almost get hit by a car and you say, oh God, you're praying. I promise you, you're talking to God. You're communicating with Him. And neural pruning is just about beginning to understand how to direct those communications a little better. You know something weird about Jesus that you'll notice if you watch Him? Jesus had a very fine line between conversations and conversations with God. Sometimes Jesus would directly talk to God in deep and heart-wrenching, pour out Himself ways in the Gospels. And sometimes He would just kind of say God stuff to people or to sickness or to problems or whatever. He would just kind of say, be healed, you're free, go away. And He would say things to where it's like He's talking to God, but He's talking to people at the same time. That's the way praying is. Y'all, praying is just talking to God, and you can do it anytime, any moment, in any part of the day. When you start thinking those thoughts that have got your brain burning through these same old neural pathways, you can just stop and say, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to think about God. I'm just going to say, God, help me with this. I call them breath prayers. You know how all the time you're breathing? Right now, all you guys are breathing, whether you know it or not. You're not breathing because you're holding your breath. But you can make yourself breathe deeply, though, if you want to, can't you? You're going to breathe, and your heart and mind and all that stuff's going to work and do its job and keep you alive. But if you just need a deep breath, take a deep breath and everybody kind of suck it in. Let it out. It feels good, don't it? You can get a deep breath during the day, and that's kind of the way prayers are. I think a lot of prayers are going on in our head all the time. We're kind of communicating with God sometimes when we don't even know we are. But you can stop in your day when the pressure gets on, and you can just take a deep prayer breath to God. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be one phrase, one sentence, and you can say, God, help me with this. God, get this out of my life. God, take care of this person. And you can start fighting your battles where they're really happening in the spirit world, in your mind, in your heart, where the enemy really attacks. And it'll start slowly changing the climate of your life.